Hey guys, I'm excited to share with you a little bit of my story. I believe we all have stories worth telling, and because I believe we were made to share them and to live in community, I'm going to tell you a little bit of mine, and honestly, in hopes that I'll get to hear more of yours. Starting off, I guess, basically, I grew up thinking and kind of coming to the conclusions that most people believed in God. Most people went to church, but all churches were pretty similar. But nobody really liked church. And the biggest one was that nobody really knew or could know what happens when you die. And so, my family, my parents, and two younger sisters, we went to church pretty regularly, but I didn't bring up spiritual topics outside of church much until middle school. And it was then that I remember asking my mom a lot about death and what that looked like. And I remember being scared just of the idea of the unknown, and being anywhere forever just immediately brought fear to my heart. And ultimately, this fear of death started to control me and continued to develop as I got older. I think both my parents and I hoped that it was just a phase, something that would go away, but it didn't. And so in middle school, when I began to ask these questions about death, I also started refusing to go to school because I wanted to be with my mom, and I was afraid that something bad would happen if I wasn't with people that knew me. So I would stay home for weeks at a time, which obviously isn't okay. And my mom finally took me to counseling, and it was there in 7th grade that I was diagnosed, I guess you'd say, with generalized anxiety disorder. But I had no idea what that meant. I knew that I didn't want to feel the way I was feeling, but I didn't know how to fix it. And as I continued through high school, I saw a variety of different counselors. My anxiety kind of came in waves, but I was able to learn to manage my anxiety enough to get through the school day, which was good. And I had super supportive friends and definitely people that knew me around me, and just focused on school and extracurriculars. But ultimately, I learned to hide my problems and hide them well from people that didn't really know me. And my life was based a lot on how I felt. What I did was always based on how I was feeling, and whenever I started to get anxious, I needed to be by my parents or people who knew me well, so that if something happened to me, they could take care of me. And I honestly remember thinking, because of this, that I would never be able to go to college, because just thinking about the possibility of something happening to me with everyone close to me hours away was just really scary. But I ended up at La Crosse, came to college, and 3.5 hours away nonetheless. So that's a whole nother story in and of itself. But fast forward to college, I was here, and I remember going to the involvement carnival on campus that first weekend just for something to do, and filling out a survey for Cru, or Campus Crusade for Christ. And I came to college wanting to check out some religious organization or get involved with a church, and was just really curious about being more involved in something like that, and figuring out why some people seem to like going to church and reading the Bible, and just really if there was anything really significant or substantial to this whole God thing. So lo and behold, that next week, the first week of classes, a sophomore girl at the time involved with Cru came knocking on my door to follow up the survey I'd filled out. And so she went through a booklet with me that talked about knowing God personally, and I had no idea what to think. I had never heard the gospel presented like that before, and I was just really overwhelmed, to say the least, it being my first week here too. But I wish I remember more of what went on in my head at that time. All I know is that there was something that made me want to keep talking about God and want to be friends with this girl who had come to my room just to talk to me. And so that weekend, we ended up hanging out and just talking more about life. And at the end of our conversation that weekend, I started to realize my need for a Savior, and the fact that in Jesus I could finally find the protection, security, and truth that I had been searching for. And I started to realize that the gospel could offer me freedom. So I accepted Christ that weekend personally, trusting that He had died for my sins, and everything began to change. I knew then that God had brought me to La Crosse for a reason, and I was plugged into Cru right away, had a lot of firsts. My first time at an evangelical church, my first time at Cru, my first time at Bible study, first Christian conference, and I absolutely loved it. I loved it all, and I began to fall in love with Jesus. I began to learn that faith was such a better foundation for my life than my feelings, and that there was hope. And so, after that first semester, my freshman year, of so many firsts and immense growth, I went home for winter break and was determined to live the rest of my life for the Lord, just really under the impression that everything was going well, better than I had expected, and would just continue to go well. But the transition back to school here in La Crosse for second semester was almost harder than initially coming to school, and I began to experience real struggle as a believer. So that transition just brought out a new bout of anxiety, and once again I was facing something so inside my head that I felt like no one really knew what was going on. And I knew that fear wasn't from the Lord, and so I just desperately wanted him to take it away, but he didn't. And so I took things into my own hands, still searching for ways to get rid of it more so than deal with it. And a few months into the second semester of my freshman year, I actually began cutting, and I can't tell you exactly why. I knew in my heart that it wasn't the answer, but it provided a way out of my emotions that I couldn't figure out otherwise. But fortunately, I had great community around me, and the Lord began to replace lies with truth very quickly. But I still felt lost in a lot of ways, caught living in between my old self and who Christ was calling and teaching me to be. But looking back to that time and now, I'm thankful for my brokenness, for it is in my weaknesses that I get to boast about Christ's strength. And through everything, God has allowed me to experience things in these past 4 years that have forced me to grow in my faith and be challenged. And he has ultimately allowed my faith to be weathered. He's allowed me to experience struggle and has brought me through it in order to build me up in him. And so I definitely still have a lot to learn, but I'm excited and I'm choosing to walk by faith, and I want to challenge you to do the same. So my name is Abby Saunders, and this is my story. What's yours?